Welcome back to the Bernard Lee Poker Show. This is a returning guest of ours. He was on my show over a decade ago. He had an incredible 2005 World Series of Poker where he won bracelets back to back. It was really truly a huge story back in 2005 where he won the $1,500 limit hold'em shootout and then the $1,500 no limit events. His second bracelet, he beat over 2,000 people. He's taken a little bit of a break from tournament poker over the last several years, but has made a big return, a splash in the Deepstacks Venetian as he has once again won back-to-back events here and is now really kind of the talk. He won his first one, taking home almost $42,000 in a $600 no-limit monster stack event. And then just a few days later, an $800 no-limit ultimate stack event and took home almost $200,000. Welcome back to the show, Mark Seif. Mark, thanks for joining us here on the Bernard Lee Poker Show, my friend.
My pleasure, buddy.
It has been a while. We used to see each other all the time. We used to teach together in multiple venues as well. You were always known and I'm sure still known as a very aggressive player. I learned a lot from you with regards to that, as my style is not that way. And I always tell people it's great to talk with people who have styles that are different than you. So you really kind of can learn more and broaden your horizons about poker. It has been a while for you to play tournament poker. It must have felt great coming back to the Venetian and making such an immediate splash.
It does feel great. I've been back in tournaments for about a week. Outside of the World Series of Poker, I really haven't played any tournaments in about 10 years. So making a return to tournament poker was something that I hadn't really thought about until very recently. And I think with COVID and everything else going on, I just wanted to get out like everyone else. And I found myself with a little bit of time this summer. So I decided to get my feet wet in a tournament series that I don't think I've ever played in before, the Venetian Deepstacks. I'd heard good things. I'd heard that they were getting huge fields and that the structure was very good and allowed a lot of play and would favor my type of play. And so I thought I'd get my feet wet and play in a couple of events, and wow, it's been fantastic.
You know, back in 2005, you had that incredible run at the World Series of Poker, and really poker life was booming. You were the announcer for the professional poker tour. As we said, you were teaching a lot. Before we get to current day, let's talk a little bit about back then. Playing a lot of tournament poker, obviously the World Series in 2005. You know, let's kind of reminisce a little bit about that. That was an unbelievable time in poker as it was incredibly booming. Remember, for everyone, let's put this in context. I know it's crazy because it's almost 2 decades ago. 2003, Chris Moneymaker does what he does. Greg Raymer the following year. 2005, the first year at the Rio. So they move it over here to the Rio, and you win these bracelets back to back. A lot of media at the time. A great time to do what you did, right?
It sure was. I was very fortunate. As you said, the poker world was just on fire at the time. We didn't know that then, but
Sure,
looking
right.
back, we can look back now and say that was kind of the heyday of poker. And like you said, the tournament, the World Series had moved from the Rio, from downtown at Binion's to the Rio. This was a huge change for all of us that had been playing for 20 years downtown. We were all of a sudden in this huge convention center, and there were just tens of thousands of people. It was crazy.
Right.
Huge fields, huge prize pools, huge coverage, like you said. There were Hollywood stars and athletes that were, competing with us for titles, and we're really into it. And it was a lot of fun. It was a crazy time.
Let's look back at 2005. The game has changed so much, obviously, over the years. Back then, you being hyper aggressive, uber aggressive. I know one of the video games marked you down as the most aggressive possible. I remember somebody who was playing the game would tell you that while we were teaching. Um, how was it back then? Utilizing an aggressive style in a time and day and age where aggression really wasn't king must have had its tremendous advantages back then.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Bernie. Back then, I was allowed to see flops cheaply and then steal my way through the tournament. If I would see a lot of flops and hit some hands, I could trap, get some chips, and then once I got some chips, I could just run over tables and basically run over table by table till the end.
Right.
It's a whole different game, as you said. Players are much looser, much more aggressive today. They kind of play the way I played.
Right.
And some of the more aggressive guys 20 years ago, they play that way now, a lot of them. And you really have to be much more careful. There's much more uh, lying in wait. There's much more set mining. There's much more slow play. Uh, and suited connectors is this the big thing, the big
Right.
difference. While players were typically playing premium cards, especially for a raise, now it's pretty common to see a 3-bet with small suited connectors, things like that, to throw their opponents off. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
it's a different game, but I also feel like there's adjustments to be made, and I feel like I've made some of those adjustments, and I feel like some of the other good players that are doing well are also making those adjustments. Mike Caro first talked about this a
Right.
long time ago. He basically said, go against the flow.
Right.
If everybody is loose aggressive, you gotta tighten up, and if everyone is playing snug, you got to loosen up. And
Right.
so, if you saw me today, you would be shocked at how few hands I enter.
Right.
I have to be because a lot of activity is usually going on around me that I
Right.
can't participate in unless I've got a premium hands. The the benefit of that though is that when I am in confrontations, generally speaking, I'll have a bigger hand today than I did 15 years ago.
Right, right. And it's advantageous probably for you that if people remember your style, that they're going to assume, oh, well, now he's going to be even more aggressive in the world that we live in. And if that is the case, you could, like you said, you're going against the flow. You really can take advantage of that because you could be making a big bet and somebody being like, oh, Mark's being aggressive. I don't believe him. I'm going to call, and you flip over the nuts or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It just happened a couple of days ago. In fact, in the $5,000 buy-in WPT Venetian Deepstacks Championship, I was at a table with a young, uh, very good aggressive player, Chance Cornu,
No, of
and
course.
I had ace jack, he had ace queen. We flopped nothing. The turn was a jack, and the river was a jack. And the action went check on the flop, check on the turn, and then I made a huge bet. In fact, I moved all in on the river,
Yep.
and Chance went into the tank until another player called time. And I think he just figured two things: one, my huge overbet, and two, my reputation as being a bluffer. It looked like a steal spot, and he called me with ace
Wow.
queen high,
Wow. Wow.
and that I think indicates. Whoops, sorry.
No problem.
That indicates exactly what you were talking about, which
Right.
is my reputation. If anybody knows me, and Chance knew me, would probably indicate to them that I'm bluffing that spot.
Yeah, for people who want to actually see kind of a little bit of snippets of that, it's actually on Twitter. That hand, I think WPT put it up on Twitter.
Okay.
Um, when you talk about the changes that have come over time, some of the things that I have noticed, to take it back, you and I talked a lot about poker in those years, God, early on those years, and you were one that definitely helped me try to become a little bit more aggressive, as I was definitely a tighter player. And I remember specifically when it was the heyday of min raising 5, 6, 7, 8 betting with ace high, I mean, just people being a little bit too crazy.
Right.
And I remember trying to kind of develop a very aggressive style, and it kind of threw my game off, in all honesty. For about 6 to 9 months, I was completely off. And I remember going back to my old style, and it worked perfectly because, like you said, it was actually against the grain, because everyone was being too aggressive, that if you just lay in wait, and eventually you're going to get a hand. Now, don't get me wrong, they could bad beat you, but eventually you're going to get a hand. And when they 3, 4, 5, 6 bet you, and you just jam, and they call being like, well, now I'm committed. Here's ace 5 offsuit. Like, well, I got aces. Like, I mean, I don't know what more you want me to think I have, but they don't think that way, right? Because they're doing this with, they're trying to play this metagame. And it seems like now it's a blend, though. It's a blend, because some of these players are not just doing that crazy raising, et cetera. And then also working in and maneuvering the minefield, because back a decade ago, you don't always want to judge a book by its covers. But if someone seemed after a little bit that they didn't really know what they were doing, in general, they really didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
But what you notice now is there is so much access to all these training sites and all these videos and all these YouTube this and YouTube that, and like I said, training sites, etc. Every once in a while, somebody will initially make a move that you're like, you're not, that's a bad move. And then do something that you're like, wait a second, where did you learn that? And then you hear them later on talking like, oh, I was on this training site and they told me to do this. Oh, it worked like magic. And so it's a very interesting world, because back then it was really what we used to do, WPT Bootcamp or WSOP Academy. Beyond that, you kind of had to read some books. Now everyone has access, right?
Sure. It's funny. I thought you were going to talk about age being a big factor. You see a younger kid, chances are they're going to be a lot more creative and play a lot more aggressively than an older person. I think that still holds true a little bit, but far less than it did. Like you said, it's probably as a result of all these training sites out there. But the thing that I used to talk about in these academies and boot camps a lot, I think still holds true now, and that's that to play tournament poker, you really have to be very, very attentive and pay attention to detail and really follow the action. I laugh when I see people with headphones. I don't understand how they can be competitive at all.
Right.
Wearing headphones, to me, is just plain stupid, because there's talk, there's subtleties, there's just you can't be in that sort of relaxed sort of state that I think people think they benefit from, and pay attention to everything that's going on. So my best advice today was the same advice I gave 20 years ago. Watch every hand, pay attention to every hand, and work your butt off. You should be exhausted at the end of the day.
Right. Mentally exhausted. Right.
You should be mentally exhausted. You should be physically exhausted, because you should also be, in a position where you're actually sort of paying attention and upright and alert and focused. And if you're kind of laying back and listening to music, or just laying back in general, I don't know how you can be that successful right now, because every opponent is a whole story in and of themselves.
Right.
And everything they've done will be some information that you have to store and then summon when you're in a hand with them.
Right.
So for those out there that are looking for a tip early on in this interview, that's the best tip I think I can give you. Again, is just pay super close attention.
And I think also, just to kind of add on to that, which I think you were discussing and talking about also, is that definitely pay attention when you're not in the hand, because you gain so much information, and the huge benefit is you're risking nothing, right? You're not putting any money in there to potentially lose. Of course, you're not to win as well, but now you can really gain information. And I tell so many times on the show repeatedly, I tell my students, I tell my listeners, the best scenario is to pay attention when you're not in the hand, guess maybe what you think they have as if you were playing against them, because then when you do play against them, now you really have a sense of, a few hands ago, twice, I guessed basically what they had. Now that I am heads up with them or playing against them, I can go with my gut feeling because previously I was right as well. Again, they could obviously make some changes, et cetera, but at least you have a point of reference to work off of. And I think so many people, like you said, are, once they fold their hand, they're in la la land, whether on headphones or ordering a drink or looking around or whatever it might be. To be honest, to me, that's often a sign too that they're not paying attention, and that indicates what kind of player they are as well.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, Bernie. Being able to put the story together such that you come up with a range of hands that you think they're on is a great exercise. Like you said, you do it, you do it, you do it when you're not in the hand, to the point where you feel pretty comfortable when you're in the hand saying, I think this player has, X in this spot based on everything I've seen so far. And that's really a big part of my game. I play each player and their stack very differently. I'm not going to be nearly as creative with a guy that hasn't played a hand in 2 hours and comes in raising under the gun. I'm going to look at my suited connectors and probably toss them in the muck, because I know I'm a big dog. However, if he and I are big stacks and I can see the flop fairly cheaply relative to my stack, that's a whole different story.
Right.
I am gonna enter that pot, especially in position.
Right. And let's talk a little bit more about that, because obviously my listeners are so fascinated about strategy and understanding it. As we talked about back in 2005 to 2010, everyone was talking about it. You really, the aggressor wins. The aggressor, and Mike Sexton would say it on WPT all the time. But now when everyone is trying to do, everyone, like you said, you always want to kind of do what against the grain. Now everyone's trying to be uber aggressive. Back then, if you had a big stack, and you were known often to have a big stack, very easy to wield that stack, because probably back then half the table would just sit back and wait for a premium hand. So you could literally just open every single hand. Somebody 3-bets you. Okay, fine. I'll let you have this one. I'm going to win 4 more anyway in the next 10 minutes or whatever. And so you could just slowly start building your stack up. And it was literally the people who had the cojones to do that would get these huge stacks and often end up at the final table, and then you would battle it out. But in today's day and age, yes, that can work, but sometimes not so much because of, all of this balancing, et cetera. How do you because you went into that last event at the Deepstacks Venetian with a big stack, took it all the way pretty much to the championship. How do you do it in today's day and era? It's just a different world. You obviously can utilize some of the techniques, but how do you balance it?
Well, I think you're right. Again, you have to be much more careful today. You build your stack typically pretty slowly, and then you look for opportunities to double up when you have the nuts or close to the nuts. And that's when you try to get the chips in. Again, some players will pay close attention to the amount of the betting as related to the pot, what percentage of bets are going in. Some players do not. I've literally watched players make, 2 and 3x pot size bets and go, gosh, wow, that's crazy. And so I remember that. And when I'm in a hand with them, there might be 1,000 in the pot. I flop the nut flush. I might toss out a $5,000 chip and see them go right for their blue stack and toss it right in and go, okay, that's the kind of hand we're going to play. It just, the bet size doesn't relate to the pot at all. And obviously that's a weakness on their part, and it's your job to exploit that weakness. Others are going to play very, very small ball. They're going to really stay within about 1/3 the size of the pot most of the time. And those that are doing that, you play small ball with them until you have an opportunity to either have a really big hand and try to increase the size of the pot through raising and re-raising, or you're going to steal from them a lot. You know that their pressure points are such that they're not going to be comfortable calling a pot size raise.
Right.
So in those spots, again, it's based on your read of the player, who you're up against, and very, very importantly, stack size. You really have to factor in stack size. Players that have big stacks, you treat them very differently than players that have small stacks. I get very creative against players who have small stacks that I know don't want to exit the tournament. You know, I'm going to check raise them with nothing a lot, hoping that they're going to lay down a big hand for fear that they could be up against a hand that would eliminate them.
Right.
Big stacks, I'm going to play them in a way that maybe, you know, puts them in a position where they're afraid to lose their big stack as well. So stack size is very, very important, but I'm going to be much more cautious.
Sure. What about like a medium stack? Like you talk about short stack, probably anywhere from 10 to 15, you know, ish stacks. Big stacks at the Venetian now, because you're starting with so many chips, probably more like the 60 to 75, 80 big blind range, maybe even more. But what about the 30-ish big blind stack? Because those are the stacks where they're not in trouble of getting eliminated right away on the, you know, short stacks. It's almost like raise, flop, check raise. You got to make a decision. 30 big blinds, you don't have that, but they have room to maneuver. But they also realize that one bad hand and they flip to a short stack really quickly. So kind of how do you play against those medium-sized stacks?
Well, most players are going to have medium stacks, so that's going to
right. That's why I asked. Yeah,
it's going to be a big percentage of your play is going to be against those types of stacks, and that's where really reading your opponent, looking at their history, if you will, and the situation. You know, everything is in poker is situational, right? If they've got a monster hand, monster flop, there's not much you're going to do unless, you know, except hopefully save chips and get out of that situation.
Right.
On the other hand, there's a scary board, and you have a card that really helps your ability to be creative. For example, there's 3 spades on board, and I have ace of spades in my hand, even though I have nothing to go with it. That's probably an opportunity for me to get really creative if I want to, so long as the player has shown the propensity to lay down in those spots. And one thing I like to make sure to teach when I used to teach, and I'll say it today, is make sure you have outs.
Right.
If there's one card to go and there's 3 spades on board and you have an ace of spades and a red card that doesn't factor in, you're still okay, because albeit you're a dog, most likely, you still have outs. Just be careful. Like the way I won heads up this last tournament, the flop came Jack 3 heads up. I had King Jack of hearts on the button, and my opponent bet out with he had a 3-7. So he had jacks and threes with a weak kicker. He bet out, I raised it, and he moved all in on me. Like, he's just drawing dead in that spot.
Right.
The only thing is a bluff catcher, but he's risking his whole stack and his whole tournament and a lot of money in the championship in a spot where there's just no need for that. So if you're going to get creative, make sure you have some outs. Make sure you have a way to win. Even if there's just a few, it's better than just be drawing almost stone cold dead like he was.
Right. And in today's world, it's a lot of, like you said, you Jack 3 and you raise, right? And so a lot of people who are listening are like, whoa, I would never do that. I have like the nuts here. Let's just keep dragging them in, etc. But there's a couple things. One, sometimes it's better to go for that home run ball, right? Because the person, if you read that person and have followed that person and understand that person may make the assumption there's no way they're going to raise if they have a jack here. So I'm not putting them on a jack. My 3 might be good, which I'm assuming that's what he thought. And then also the other thing is that you touched on this before, is that watch what the player does in their own betting patterns, like you said, making a pot size or 2 times pot size bet. Because often what a player does themselves is what they think you're doing to them on the river or turn or whatever it might be. And that's one thing that I have really picked up on is that if they are, like you said, a big value better or something along those lines, and they're going to value second pair and they're going to bet it semi-strong, if you do the same with maybe the nuts, they might think, you know what, I think they're trying to value me here and I'm going to call. And if you can really pick up on those little things, a lot of times you can pick up some significant chips along the way where you're doing two different acts or two different actions against two different players. Would you agree?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a little history there too. I had such a big stack at the final table that I really did use it in a very aggressive way. So I had check raised him in that spot 3 or 4 times for a
Yep.
similar. He had come out betting 1.7 million, 1.8 million, and 2 times before that, I'd made it 5 million with absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And I felt like the board, the flop gave me an opportunity to do that, create with a high likelihood of success, because it's heads up. You got to figure we got nothing. Both of us got nothing a lot of time.
Right.
When I'm check raising him for 5 million in those spots, they're typically he had folded twice before, and the reason why I did it this third time with the nuts is because I knew that he was sick and tired of my crap, and he was sick and tired of me doing that to him, in his opinion, possibly with nothing. And he was right. 2 out of 3 times I had nothing. But this particular spot, that's one of the things I used to talk about too. If you're when you bluff, make sure your bluffs look exactly like when you're when you got the nuts. So I kept the amount the same because he kept his amount the same, and I made it look like here we go again. And he just, he had my opponent, to his credit, my heads up opponent, he came and he was in tears afterwards, and he said, I really thought you were trying to move me off the hand again, and I just was sick and tired of it.
Yeah. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk more with Mark about his 2 recent wins and how he's come back to the tournament circuit when we return here as we continue the 14th anniversary celebration of the Bernard Lee Poker Show.